It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the movies on November 17th, 2000. And I'd say it was a pretty big weekend for some pretty impressive movies that would later go on to have some lasting legacies to them. Four movies in particular. So why don't we just go ahead and jump right to it, and we'll start off with easily the biggest new release of the weekend, and it's hard to believe that this came 10 years after Home Alone became the biggest holiday film of all time. This one came pretty close, too. It's Jim Carrey and Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas, directed by Ron Howard.
Grinch. Jim Carrey is the Grinch.
Yeah, I don't think I really need to tell you what the story is of this movie. I mean, it's pretty much what you think it is. It's a story about the Grinch, played by Jim Carrey, who is a nasty creature that hates Christmas and plots to steal it away from the Who's, who love it so much. And they add new elements to it this time around by making Cindy Lou Who more of a character in this one. Like, she's a little bit older than she was in the animated short and in the book. She wants to know what Christmas is all about and why the Grinch hates it so much. And it's part of the many things that they add to this movie. So, like I said, this was directed by Ron Howard, produced by him and Brian Grazer. And it was a big success when it came out. It was the #1 movie at the box office for the majority of the Christmas 2000 season, grossing over $345 million worldwide. It won the Oscar for Best Makeup, which, I mean, come on. I mean, even if you didn't like the movie, the makeup in this movie is kind of pretty awesome, especially on the Grinch. But was also nominated for art decoration and costume design. So with all that in the record books, people often choose the animated special over the movie. And honestly, what can I say about that? I mean, that's the original animated one. The '66 one is still the definitive version of the Grinch, no matter what happens here. But does that mean this one's an all-around mess, or as bad as everyone makes it out to be? Let's take a look at it as a whole first, before we can really delve into my overall final thoughts on the film. Let's look at the positives first. The city of Whoville looks pretty cool. It's very reminiscent of the book and the animated special, and even Mount Whoville's looks are impressively similar to the book and the cartoon. You can definitely tell the filmmakers wanted to make something that looks as close to the Seuss book as they could, and I thought they did a pretty good job with it. Second, when the film follows the story and doesn't focus on the newer additions to the plot, it does its job pretty well. It pays a good homage to the original story. There are some new additions that I did think kind of work. I liked the fact that we found out the real reason why the Grinch hated Christmas so much in the Who's is because the Who's made fun of him, and he basically just swore him off after a really bad experience around Christmas time. And then there are other new additions that are really bad, but we'll get to those later on. Lastly, I think Jim Carrey's perfectly cast as the Grinch. He just fits that role well, acting-wise, and in the way the character looks. You could easily see why the Oscar for Best Makeup went to him that year, because that guy had that on for so many hours a day, had to put it on for a number of hours beforehand, and like, for anybody to go through that, I mean, you have to give those people credit for making that work, and especially Jim Carrey, for making that work as well as it could be. I mean, better than the casting of people that they were going to get for this. Like, literally, they were going to get Jack Nicholson and Eddie Murphy for the role of the Grinch, which, yeah, that would have been very, very, wouldn't have been great. Would not have been great indeed. I think Anthony Hopkins' narration also is a nice touch added to here, and I do like Taylor Momsen as Cindy Lou Who. I think it's a nice addition to her, having her more of a role in this, as she's the only Who character you end up really giving a crap about, which brings me to a lot of the negative points of the film, and trust me, there is a lot of them. It starts with the fact that the good majority of the Who's are way too meaner than they should be. I mean, in the original short and books, the Who's love Christmas as a time for family and friends to be there, but here, they just look at Christmas as a time to give presents, win lining contests, and everything against the true meaning of Christmas. I mean, they have to add to this expanded story. I get it, but there are better ways you could have kept the spirit of the original book in the cartoon than this. I mean, I think that's something that the Illumination film did a lot better, which I'll talk about that towards the end here. But in addition, as great as the makeup is, the Who's look really weird. Like the noses they put on them are just really pointless. The Who's look like normal people except for their hairstyles. I mean, was there a purpose for this change? Because I certainly don't see it. A lot of the newer things they add to the movie are completely pointless, but the one segment that I absolutely despise, I think it's the most pointless segment in the whole movie, it's the Jubilation sequence. It's an entire 30-minute sequence, a half an hour where they have this huge celebration. Cindy Lou invites the Grinch down to the party, and he accepts, and it looks like he finally has a reason to be happy until the mayor who bullied the Grinch as a child proposes to Martha May, played by Christine Baranski, who the Grinch had a crush on as a kid, and thus causes the Grinch to cause havoc around the town and go back to the way he was before the party, thus creating the ultimate waste of time I've ever seen in a movie. Like, literally, nothing changes between the start of that segment to the end, and it has absolutely no purpose to the story, and you could have taken it out. So you wouldn't have 30 extra minutes that are completely pointless. It's the ultimate waste of time, and one of the reasons why the movie plays for 2.5 hours on TV stations during the holidays, it serves no purpose to the story. You really could have just gotten rid of that whole sequence. Nobody would have noticed anything. It's one of the stupidest sequences that the film felt like it needed to have, and it shouldn't have been added to the film whatsoever. I mean, it's just, again, the Illumination one did it better because it didn't have to add that long segment of pointlessness. Like, there's a jubilation scene in that movie, but it's very short and sweet, kind of gets to the point of what they're trying to establish here and just moves on. And, like, it's a span of like 5-10 minutes maybe, but this is completely ridiculous. And yeah, this movie has a ton of flaws to it, but in terms of the other Dr. Seuss adaptations that have been released, like, Cat in the Hat and then Horton Hears a Who and the Lorax, this is still the second best of the four, next to Horton Hears a Who. Actually, third best probably, because I go back and forth. Okay, it's kind of hard to go back and forth on which Grinch version I like, because yeah, I like the Illumination Grinch a lot. I actually, for the longest time, thought it was their best overall film as a studio. But like, the more I think about it, yeah, I would say the animated 2018 Grinch movie was better. That was probably the best movie of the Dr. Seuss films that we've had in the 21st century. But again, nothing ever tops the original film, like the original short. Like, nothing will ever top that. The 2018 Grinch is probably the best one we've gotten since then, and this would probably be in third. But then again, I would rather take the Benedict Cumberbatch one and this one over the Mike Myers Cat in the Hat, which is a horrible movie, and then Dr. Seuss's The Lorax, which is a hypocritical mess and in my top 30 least favorite movies of all time. But this would definitely be up there. I think there is a lot more to this that I actually really do admire about it. I like the music by James Horner. I just watched it again during the holiday season. The scenes, there are visually impressive scenes to look at, and Carrey really does put all of his effort into it. I mean, it has warrant to it, but like I said, when it sticks to the original story, it's done very well. From casting Jim Carrey as the title character, the look of the film, some of the new additions they add do work, but more times than not, it doesn't work. Everything else kind of falls flat big time. It's a movie that you could have easily taken huge chunks out of, and you would have had a watchable movie, but it's one of those ones where it's just like, it's certainly not a bad movie, but it's definitely not a good movie either. It's a very mixed bag of a film, and certainly a movie that I wouldn't say is one of the great Christmas movies, but if it's on TV every once in a year, I will pop it on. But like I said, I do like the 2018 Grinch one more, even though there are elements to that one I don't really like as much. Like, I think, comparing Grinches, I think Jim Carrey's Grinch is better than Benedict Cumberbatch's Grinch, because the Grinch in that one really is not a guy that really hates Christmas. He just hates people, and yet, despite that, he still is more than willing to go down to the town to go get groceries and interact with some people that he really doesn't like. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He's kind of an introvert in that case, but in terms of a story, it works better there, but here, like, I will say Jim Carrey's the better Grinch over Cumberbatch, but I thought it was alright. I think it's a good movie. Like, once every Christmas, it's fine to watch, but never anything afterwards. So, yeah. On to the next film, and that is Rugrats in Paris the Movie.
The Rugrats are going to Paris.
Really? They're speaking French already.
They're seeing new faces,
Come on, I'll show you the shortcut.
visiting new places, and getting the biggest surprise.
I'm gonna get some wow. movie. Yeah, that'll be the day.
of their tiny little lives. Rugrats in Paris, the movie.
Hey, you done ready? Wait for me. Somebody needs a nap.
Starts Friday, November 17th.
So Rugrats in Paris is, of course, the sequel to the Rugrats movie, and kind of like with the Rugrats movie, how there was an episode before setting up this movie, there was a TV movie that came out just a couple of months before this movie did, called, I think it was called Acorn Nuts and Diaper Butts, which basically was setting up a lot of what they have in this movie, where you basically have the Rugrats going to Paris and Chucky basically taking the leading role in this one, searching for a new mother, who we see the introductions to his new mother Kira and her daughter Kimmy Finster, who would later become eventual characters in the seasons to come after this. And this marks the only appearance of the two villains in the Rugrats franchise, Coco LaBouche, played by Susan Sarandon. It's basically Cruella de Vil, kind of, except instead of dogs, she hates children, including babies, and her accomplice Jean-Claude, played by John Lithgow. The first Rugrats movie was fine for what it is, a decent feature film version of the show, keeping the spirit of the series intact, upping the animation style as well as the adventure aspect, but still keeping kind of the charm of the original series. With this, I feel like it's a vast improvement over the previous film, because it seemed like the people behind this movie decided to try to give us more, not just in terms of an adventure, but more going into elements of stories that have been mentioned in the series beforehand, but never fully realized, such as the main crux of the film, in which not only the babies go to Paris, but Chucky searches for a new mother after his dad said it's time for him to get back into the dancing scene, which again, like I said, is a subplot that dates back to the original runs of the series, the Mother's Day episode, of course, and then the TV movie, which I just mentioned. I mean, in the Mother's Day episode, we basically find out that what happened to Chucky's mother and why she hasn't been seen up to this point, and Chaz decides to tell Chucky after all these years that she had a terminal illness shortly after her birth, and that's a pretty impressive thing for a show to go for, and be not afraid to tackle some pretty heavy stuff in there. And it's a very good episode. If you haven't seen the Mother's Day episode of Rugrats, definitely check that one out. And a lot of the emotional moments in Rugrats in Paris do work very nicely. There are a lot of really good quiet moments. The beautiful animation that's in this movie. Like, there's that great scene where Chucky's looking out of the airplane and the clouds show him and his mother. And it's some really nice CG animation that they put in there. Overall, the animation looks a whole lot better than the first movie does. I think it adds to a lot of the enjoyment factor of this film over the first film. The little bit of the downside that I have with this is there was the big climax. You gotta have a big climax. Of course, it's a sequel, but it's also a Rugrats sequel. So you have the kids inside this big Reptar animatronic from basically the equivalent of Euro Disneyland, Euro Reptar Land, and it runs amok all over Paris. I'm not gonna lie, it's a little too over the top, even for a kids movie. It leaves you asking so many questions, like, most notably, why the hell is there room at the top of this robot for a baby to control this giant robot around? And like, it's creating havoc all over Paris, and it's just like, it's kids movie logic, I get it, but still, I have to ask that question about this movie. But overall, when you really look at the film in general, it is definitely a vast improvement over the previous film in terms of the better animation, better storytelling, better visuals, better music. It's just more nicely done, well put together. You can see a lot more effort being put into the final product, and it works very well. If I have to pick the best overall Rugrats film of the three films, this is definitely my choice for it. It's definitely a vast improvement over the first movie, and I recommend it. Rugrats in Paris, the movie. So with that said, on to our next film, and that is Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Sixth Day.
Do you remember anything after being scanned?
The human was cloned. That human was you.
Well, you cloned the wrong man. And you destroy the evidence. And you're the evidence.
Daddy?
How do you know? He's not you, and you're not him.
I know who I am. The Sixth Day. Rated PG-13. Opens everywhere November 17th.
So The Sixth Day tells the story of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's a family man of the future. He's illegally cloned by accident as part of a vast conspiracy involving a shady billionaire businessman, and is thrust into a struggle to clear his name and protect his family from the conspirators who seek to keep the cloning a secret. And the title refers to the Judeo-Christian Genesis creation narrative, where God creates mankind on the sixth day. And this is also the acting debut of Terry Crews, who basically has a cameo in... Not even a cameo, but a supporting role in here, working for the main villain of the film, played by Tony Goldwyn. Michael Rappaport, Michael Rooker, and Robert Duvall are also in the film as well. This was one that did not do well at the box office when it came out, but it was one of those ones when I saw the posters for this and saw the trailers for it, I kind of wanted to see it. I thought it was something that I'd really be getting into. I never got to see it in theaters, but I finally got to watch it when it came out on DVD, and I really enjoyed this one. This was a very underrated Schwarzenegger film. He wasn't making the best action movies of his career up to this point, but this was a really fun movie. It has a great, interesting premise that's very reminiscent of something like from what was in Total Recall, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was based off of something by the people who made Total Recall, by the person who made Total Recall. I could be wrong on that, don't quote me on that, but it's not listed here on Wikipedia, so I could be wrong on that completely, but I thought the movie was fun overall. It's not a great movie per se. It has a lot of flaws to it. The story does get a little bit too predictable for its own good, but I thought they did a good job of handling much of the premise as they could, and the film overall is a ton of fun. It's Schwarzenegger doing what Schwarzenegger does best. I like the ideas of the film. I like the motivations they were setting up here. I think it is a very solid, well-made film. Definitely could have been a whole lot better, but it was one that I was really happy to see that it actually was seen as kind of an enjoyable film overall when I finally got a chance to see it after the time I didn't get to see it in theaters. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Sixth Day, very underrated Schwarzenegger film. I recommend it. But so with that said, on to our last film, and that is Ben Affleck and Gwyneth Paltrow in the romantic comedy Bounce.
In front of as LA's hottest ad executive, I'm a born salesman closer. Being smooth was part of his game. I was gonna call you
I was gonna hold my breath.
until Abby
Hello.
became a part of his life. That's what you get tired of. I'm more worried she's gonna get tired of me. Academy Award winners Ben Affleck and Gwyneth Paltrow.
I want someone to say goodnight to. A last call of the day.
Bounce.
I don't have a last call of the day.
Rated PG-13 in theaters Friday, November 17th.
Perhaps the term romantic comedy in quotation marks would probably work better, but in this you have Ben Affleck, who plays a guy who has just signed an airline in Chicago as a big client, but is ironically delayed at the airport, waiting for a flight on LA at that same airline. He meets a fellow passenger named Greg, who opts to be bumped, even though it means missing an activity with his oldest son. When the flight gets resumed, Buddy thinks he's doing a good deed by swapping tickets with Greg so he can get home to his son. Sadly, the flight crashes, and Buddy conspires with his friend, the ticket agent, that night to take his name off the passenger list and put Greg's on. Once he's back in LA, his new client dictates that the company runs a series of feel-good ads about the crash. Buddy feels very hypocritical and completely loses it when the commercials win a Clio. After going through rehab, he decides he needs to check on Craig's widow, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, but he doesn't plan on falling in love with her. And you can kind of see where this is going to go from here. And yep, it's literally going to go down every single romantic cliche path we've seen done over and over again. This is directed by Don Roos, who gave us The Opposite of Sex beforehand, and that was a better film than anything in this movie, and it just doesn't work because it's not an engaging story, and you don't really buy into the relationship between Affleck and Paltrow. These are two Academy Award-winning actors, and they just can't... The chemistry just isn't there overall. It just doesn't have that spark that needs to really lift a story like this over, and it really does hurt itself in the end, despite a really good cast overall, and it also includes Joe Morton, Natasha Henstridge, Tony Goldwyn again, Johnny Galecki, David Paymer, Alex D. Linz, Jennifer Grey. There are some interesting ideas overall here, but just the execution just doesn't really come together when it matters the most, and it just didn't work overall. It really was a major misfire on a number of different levels, and you really do expect a whole lot more from it. Not much more I could say about this one. That's Bounce for you. And so with that said, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies as we'll head into Thanksgiving weekend 2000 next time. We'll take a look at 3 movies, including M. Night Shyamalan's follow-up to The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, the sequel to the live-action 101 Dalmatians, 102 Dalmatians, and also Jeffrey Rush in Quills. So 3 films overall. We'll take a look at those movies on the next episode. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, please hit the playlist on the next page, check out the previous episode, and don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. So with that said, I'm off. I will see you guys next time, and until then, as always, take care.